order. The December 1st meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals. We're hosting the meeting remotely, both in person attendance and online via Zoom. Currently, we do have a quorum. There's 2 in person and 1 on Zoom. So we'll start with the roll call. David Morris is our chair, but I'll be acting as chair here in person tonight. Matt Watkins present. David Morris.
Present.
Woody Chittick.
Present.
Okay. 3 in attendance. We have 2 agenda items tonight. The first is a continuance, continued hearing for a dock special permit at 45 Joy Place. Be followed by a new special permit for 141 South Main Street. So in regard to 45 Joy Place, since the last meeting, there's been a number of additional submissions. We received a revised submittal dated 11/21/25 from the applicant. In addition, we received a riparian boundary analysis plan dated 11/6/25 and a letter to the ZBA from Attorney DeLisi and his firm, as well as an email confirmation, which was a correspondence between himself and Merrill Engineering dated 11/21/25. So I think we have a number of different things to review. Leah's joined us as well. So we have a number of different things to review. Jeff, if you want to take care of that.
Okay, so for the record, it's Attorney Jeff DeLisi from DeLisi Parents, Situate. I'm here with Ashley, my client, in the room, as well as Paul Siebert from Grady Consulting. As Matt indicated at the prior to this meeting, we have a few submittals, one of which is a letter from me. The letter from me essentially walks the board through the special permit criteria, that being that the standard is no adverse impact to water quality or drainage patterns of the natural water course. There was a significant discussion at the last meeting about whether the survey is correct and therefore whether we meet the required setback for structures from the property line. We have provided that analysis from Grady Consulting. I also spoke with Merrill Engineering, who indicated that the colonial method is the proper method to employ, which was employed by our engineer and therefore allows us to meet the setback. So I'm not going to belabor the issue. We had quite a hearing last hearing. This is a dock that is not unlike any other dock on Little Harbor. It does not impact the easement rights of our abutter who appeared at the last meeting, who actually resides on the opposite side of the road and has the right to an easement, which is a very short distance. For purposes of this meeting, we extrapolated that easement out to the edge of the salt marsh, just to demonstrate that the dock doesn't interfere with that should that be determined to be a future right of this individual. So with that, if the board has any questions or would like to hear from Mr. Seaberg as to the boundary line analysis plan, but the bottom line is it is the only plan in front of you. It is a stamp plan, our site plan, and I think that the board has the ability to accept it for what it is and close the meeting and vote. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Can you hear me?
Do you want to try turning it off and put it back on again?
Test.
Matt.
Thank you. Maybe they both can't be on at once.
Yeah, we're just turning off.
It doesn't budget.
Okay, we'll turn to the board members for any questions. Yeah. David, did you want?
Yeah, I have just one thing. We have no jurisdiction over easements. And if there is any kind of dispute about infringing upon an easement, that is a legal matter and not a matter for zoning.
Okay.
Maybe. Through the chair, I'd also like to sort of enhance on that topic. The easement does not affect the property line. The property line is the property line, and that's what we measure setback. And the easement is simply a right of passage. So I believe that it looked to me as though the site plans were accurately drawn and setback.
Yeah, I think in my look at it, a lot of the criteria seem to be pretty straightforward with the height, the ground cover. Obviously, the issue being the potential issue with setback and the utilization of the colonial method. I guess one question I might have would be, maybe for the survey team would be like, so if we were not utilizing the colonial method, based on the site plan, it's a true statement that we would not have the side setback. Is that?
Oh.
Well, first we have to actually, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
So first we actually have to establish the boundary lines as they extend out to the waterways before we can determine the setbacks. And the colonial method was determined to be the most appropriate method to do that. And by doing so, we meet those setback requirements.
Okay. Yeah, one of the reasons I ask is, I know the applicant has explained to us that the colonial method's the most appropriate method, and there's been one other, professional reference to that method. There's some stuff that I've read that speaks about the colonial method not being, an appropriate method because, more modern methods have, more precise information to them. So for example, like the colonial method was initially based on things like trees and rocks and, elements like that. Whereas, as things have, technology has improved and, the industry has morphed more towards a more modern methodology, which has yielded more precise information. The details that you've given, as to how we calculate the colonial method seem to be, well thought out, and they seem to be the right formula to create them, kind of create the calculations. But I guess I was just raising it, and that's more of a question for the board. Like, do we feel like that this colonial method is the right method to be using, or is this the method that yields the results that the applicant's looking for? So
I don't believe we've been presented with an authoritative alternative method. If there is one, I think it should be presented to the board, but just to say that you have a difficult time finding it to be logical or not is not very relevant, given what we know.
The only thing, so I'm new to this. I had to Google colonial method versus any other method. And so it would seem that the colonial method makes sense for straight banks along rivers. And then they would say for something similar to a cove with abnormal water lines. A pie method or another central would be the preferred way to do it. I don't know that one or the other makes sense. Obviously, this is the colonial method, which is utilizing this, but there is another method, and it is there's, I believe, 6 other methods. The only other one that seems to make sense in this case would be for a small lake or cove, and it's considered the pie method, and that would be the only other one that seems applicable in this case, but we obviously haven't seen it, and it doesn't show up on any of the other plans that date back 1910, 1950, whatever. So
Yeah, I think if we don't have it in evidence before us, we've only got one method to consider at this point. And I understand what Matt's saying, and I think there are much better ways to locate the property lines. As far as figuring out the riparian line, that's a formula that flows from the location of property lines. We have, I guess, the best information available to us at this point, figuring out where the property lines are, and we don't have any information to the contrary. And, I always love to go back 400 years to figure things out. So I just don't see anything else in front of us that gets us anywhere.
comment in the back. Do you want to use the microphone?
Actually, let me just,
So I just want to just ask if Paul has any follow-up to Matt's comments, or if you're just going to rest on your applicability of colonial method as you've done.
So when you're referring to like more accurate ways on determining the property boundaries, that relates to, better technology these days and more accurate equipment. When it comes to these riparian boundary lines, it's more complex and kind of dates back to these older methods in determining those property boundaries and how the original shoreline was when the lots were originally created. It's not essentially less accurate because it's an older method. It's really the only method that you have to use. And it's not exactly less accurate. It's just the only method that as you referenced the pie method, there's certain methods that we used based on the water boundaries to determine those property lines. It's not exactly technology, it's just the different methodologies that are used, if I've relayed that correctly to the board.
Just
Yeah.
to kind of follow up on that, David, we use the colonial method requires us to locate the intersection of the two properties at the original shoreline as it was laid out. So we've done that, and to kind of bring it back to the reason why we're even having this discussion is because the project next door, the cemetery project, had a survey that showed the direction of a property boundary headed out towards the marsh, but that area was not surveyed. And had that line been followed and extrapolated straight out, there might have been some setback issue. But of course we can't rely upon that because it wasn't actually surveyed in that location. And what we've done is utilize the best method that our surveyor has identified this. So
I understand that. I have two other questions though. What do you say to the issue of accretion changing those property boundaries, which would necessarily change the riparian boundary?
I'd have to defer to Paul on that, but I think you have to go to the origin, which is the initial plan that lays out the shoreline. And then you draw, I think you take a perpendicular line at that intersection and extrapolate that straight out. So it almost doesn't matter whether sand was deposited and into this property. I mean, remember, we own out to the mean, I'm not sure, high or low water, which is pretty far out. Any accretion that would have occurred would have actually occurred on our property. It just would have been less water and more sand, if that makes any sense. At least that's the way I view it. But Paul, if you have any
Yeah,
questions.
so that's exactly correct. So the original shoreline is used because it established a predetermined baseline when the lots were originally created before any human or natural alterations, like erosion or accretion, that can change the shoreline over time. And the original shoreline is a fixed reference point to establish those boundary lines.
All right. My second question is, this is, I guess if it's a 400-year-old issue, it seems to me that must have been some litigation on it at some point or another. Have you found any cases, Jeff, that would speak to that?
Haven't looked. And the reason why I haven't looked, David, is because we have a stamp survey and a call was made. And if you want me to look, I can, but if there is litigation or if there's the absence of litigation, it doesn't speak to these facts as far as I see it. But I can look at that. I just think that it's irrelevant. What we have here is a site plan, which is reliable.
And Jeff, I don't disagree with you on that. This is the first time in my memory that we've ever dealt with this
Yeah.
riparian lines and the colonial method.
Yep.
And I would just feel more comfortable if there was something, some decided case that helped us follow this whole logical string along.
Well, if I researched that issue and didn't find a deciding case, that's not necessarily determinative either, David.
Oh,
That's
I
what my
understand
concern
that.
is, right? It's which method do you use, right? It's not really a legal issue as much as a call by a surveyor as to which method is the most appropriate. I don't view it as a legal issue. But
Well, it seems if it's affecting people's property rights, it's come up in a legal issue. And people feel strongly about that sort of thing. But if you can find something that would be helpful, if you can't, it's not, it doesn't hurt your case at all. But I would just feel more comfortable if you found something that explained it in legal terms, how this all works.
well, I'd be happy to do the research. My concern is continuing the meeting, and I guess I'm wondering if the board were comfortable with closing the meeting this evening, subject to the submission of any case law that I find or don't find, and then vote it at the next meeting.
Well, we haven't heard from everybody yet, so it's hard to say whether we can do that or not.
Just a point of clarification, Dave, when you're talking to Jeff about researching any litigation, are you talking about this particular piece of property or?
Oh, no. Just the whole,
Just
what,
the whole concept.
yeah, in what circumstances is this colonial method appropriate? And how is it generally applied?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dave, they did provide the one memo in regard to the colonial method. But I think,
And also excerpt.
I think you're,
Inconclusive.
I think you're kind of looking for more. Even like potential cases, right, that utilized.
The land court case would be good.
Yeah. I will note too, for the record, I was probably 10 minutes ago, I saw Lee Darst has joined as well. Lee, did you have any questions or comments?
No, I didn't. I had read the memos, and I think David covered the questions that I had when I read it, because I also was concerned that, I mean, we don't do anything the way we did it 400 years ago, so I can't imagine. I can't imagine hasn't been another method in the interim.
Uh, for the time being, do any of the board members have any additional comments, or do we want to hear from the public next?
No additional comments.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, and we'll open it up to public comment. I'll pass this mic back to the podium, and if when you come up to make your public comment, if you can identify yourself and your address for the record, then appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Brian Nelson, 40 Joy Place, the butter. And I believe that ZBA is in receipt of the memo from 10, I forget, a couple weeks ago. So thanks. I think there's a few different issues. We spent our time talking about the surveys as well as there are some other issues too. So first of all, I think Mr. Watkins, you asked if there was any other survey that would have permitted the dock. I didn't really hear a clear answer there, but if there are multiple survey methods, many of which are applicable, and we've chosen one that would let the dock go through, I think if there are questions about that, the CBA has the ability to just require a peer review. And so you can simply ask for another survey company to take a look and say, hey, what would you use? How would it? And so I think that's one of the main options here. And I'm not here to say that this survey is directly wrong. There's some things that certainly look that way to me, but that's an option here. I think with respect to Mr. McMorris's question in case law, I have 4 case laws. I'll get to that. Or 4 different issues that describe 4 different Massachusetts state case law that directly address the law of accretion. And so, but before I get to that, I think that, and I appreciate that the surveyor, Timothy Bennett, sent that letter. I've been asking lots of questions. Not only really one of them was answered of the 8 different issues I had here. And the first thing I want to address is in the memo that they sent is the colonial method. And so there's 4 pages from a 500-600 page book, which is a textbook for surveying. And so the textbook is generally applicable rules and principles that exist to the law of survey across the United States. What I'm talking about is Massachusetts. And so things that are generally applicable are different than Massachusetts law of accretion. Those are different than ambulatory boundaries, which are moving boundaries in state law. It's different than ownership down to mean high water, which is most states and most surveys. Massachusetts is actually mean low water line. And so all of these things mean that Massachusetts, of course, Massachusetts state law trumps a textbook that talks about general principles. And so when you look at those 4 pages, you'll notice that it mostly talks about inland lakes and circular coves. And so should this method be applied? I don't think so, but maybe that would be a great question for peer review. I just thought I'd open my notes here. So the other, I think, key part, a few of the parts here. Mr. Stewart talked about, and the memo talks specifically about the colonial method, and council also talked about going back to the original lot lines from 1910, which is interesting because that is directly applicable to the colonial rule that they put with regards, again, with regard to inland lakes and coves on whatever the pages in that book. But again, that doesn't take into account the fact that Massachusetts state law has law of accretion and erosion. So if it's erosion, the line changes. If it's accretion, then it moves out and you own that land. And so what they're trying to do, is set the water boundary based on the land plan. And so that's what the surveyor said. This is the methodology. We go back to the original partition in 1910, and we go back to the original water boundary. But you can't actually do that to establish water boundaries. These are land court documents for land purposes. Establishing a water boundary based on 1910 isn't permissible as far as I understand it in the law of survey. And so there are no markings as to where mean high water is versus mean low water, which, for hundreds of years has been 100 yards plus out into the tides. I think the other point, which is probably determinative here, is if you're going to decide where the water boundary is to use the colonial method, then you know that there's water. And so what they've done is they've taken the colonial method for water boundaries and taken it over something that's well above mean high water. So you can't apply a water boundary method to land. Not only that, but there is a specific prohibition against that in the deed. And so the deed to 45 Blue Place, the land court plans shall be applicable to land boundaries, not water boundaries. So you can't go back and say our water boundary is here from 1910 and then apply this methodology. It's specifically prohibited in the deed.
Excuse me, do we have that?
I have it here.
Well, that doesn't help me. It's supposed to be in front of us, if you want to raise it.
Yes, I only received so my letter to the ZBA was from 3 weeks ago. Their reply came in last week, but there wasn't time to get that in to your packet, and I received it today. So, but I have it printed here if you'd like to see it. It's the deed. So this was news to me as of this afternoon when I read their reply. Would you like to see it?
I think
It's,
I think in our zoning bylaw that says we can't receive it.
that's
It wouldn't
right.
be fair to anybody prior to the, this short of the meeting. I mean, it states it right on our website.
Julia?
Yeah, I mean, it's something you could submit after the fact to Julia, depending on, if this meeting is continued or closed. If it's a continued meeting, it means that we have a window of opportunity for submittals. If it's a closed hearing, then it means that the window's closed for public input. But nonetheless, I mean, your comments are registered, but the document itself, if the meeting's continued, I would suggest submitting it through the appropriate channel, which would be through Julia.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't exactly sure I'm gonna do that, given like just the timing of the letters, there's delays, and so I brought it here expecting it to continue, because again, I just got this, but it answers some of the questions that we've had here. But regardless of the deed or not, again, applying a water boundary methodology to upland violates some of those rules. So Mr. McMorris, I'd like to go to some of the case law that you talked about here, just a second. There's specifically 4 cases, Adams v. Frothing, and these are not in, again, these cases aren't in the submitted document because these were from today. I got the response from the lawyer in the survey company. I read it today, but there are 4 cases, and so there's definitely room to continue the conversation. But Adams v. Frothingham, and I'll submit all this, of course. Allen v. Wood, Burke v. Commonwealth, Pollock v. Wellfleet, and these talk about registered title and taking title to upland and accretion, and the fact that Massachusetts boundaries move with erosion or accretion. And so this is a documented part of Massachusetts boundary law. And so when there's erosion and accretion, these things move, which is why you can't apply the colonial method to a water boundary from a land plan to 1910. You have to actually survey to find out where the mean high water and mean low water mark is. Now, if they wanted to, again, pick one of these survey methods, okay, colonial method, then you'd have to apply it where the water meets the land today, based on the survey, which would be significantly further. And if they were to do that, then they would actually be not close to having the setbacks. It wouldn't actually even be their property, is the way I understand it. It would belong to a different property owner.
All
I
right.
understand it as a surveyor.
Well, if we could keep,
You
if
can't.
you have a comment,
cannot
you can go up
communicate.
after him.
But I do have a question for you. Do you have a legal opinion on this matter, or is this your supposition?
I mean, my legal opinion is that, and having looked at your overviews of the case law, survey of property, the colonial method, all of these things, I think my legal opinion is that the property line should extend to mean low water. The colonial method, if you're going to apply that method, should be done at the water line, and that's based on the case law. I don't have outside counsel. I am a lawyer. And so I think I want to come back to my original point between the deed, the case law for accretion, the fact that what they're referencing is the textbook for the whole US, and they don't reference any of the issues there that they haven't actually addressed any of the issues on accretion, the primary lot lines and what it means to either ownership of the property or the setbacks. And then second, I want to come to the, Julia, we lost the screen. I just want to make sure it does.
I have a screen on my computer saying that my device ran into a problem and needs to restart.
Should we pause?
Yes.
Okay. Off. Perfect. No. Me, yeah, under pressure there. Oh, we do have a quorum.
Theoretically, it should still be running because this is a co-host. So fingers crossed that it's still running. We're just gonna hop back on.
Yeah, my screen shows that it's still recording.
David, can you hear us? We're coming back up now.
Yeah, I can hear you. And
Okay, we had a technical problem, so we did pause and we're just bringing it back up on the screen now.
okay. I said my screen shows that it's recording. So
Did they lose us at all? Did it?
so where are we at?
So we're still in the public comment period. Brian had paused his comments when the screen went out.
Okay.
We're just trying to get the visual back up here in the room. Okay. I'll hit that to you, Brian. Sorry. It is on. Thank you.
So I think I want to, there's a couple new points, but just to recap, since we lost the thread of it. So in terms of this survey methodology, again, there's a whole bunch of them. They've chosen this one, but not only have they chosen the colonial method, I believe they're misapplying it by just taking the national textbook and disregarding Massachusetts case law, disregarding Massachusetts laws of survey or accretion, and disregarding the deed, which specifically specifically prohibits water boundaries from being set by the land plans. I think that it's not only potentially the wrong method, but it's also being misapplied. I think another point is that, which wasn't addressed in my letter, was inconsistent methodologies across the right boundary and the left boundary. So if you look at the right boundary and the left boundary from their site plan, the property line suddenly goes to a very wide right angle over the cemetery's seawall, retaining wall, and marsh. On the left, it's just a straight diagonal line. And so my question was why would that be? It looks like it's one methodology for the right-hand side and the different methodology for the left-hand side. And so there was no response to that. I don't know if Mr. Seberg wants to address that, or if the committee has other questions about that. But that's an outstanding question, why they would be so drastically different, at least in appearance. The other piece is, as I understand the colonial rule, that when you're looking at, you shouldn't be looking at just the adjacent properties, but you need to look all the way around the rest of the harbor. So it would include a few more properties, not the entire harbor, excuse me, but this more proximate to this area. So not just the two adjacent properties, but they'd have to actually look at least to probably one or two more properties on Joy to try to use this calculation methodology. They don't do that. They just use the left and the right. I'm not sure how they actually survey those other properties, so that's a separate issue. But all of these things, I think, go to the methodology. But I want to remind everyone, there are two surveys in front of you. There's a stamped survey that at the very least goes out to the seawall because they surveyed where they built the wall. And so if there's no opinion as to exactly where the salt marsh and mean high water is, it's at least 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 feet up. And so that inconsistency alone should, I think, raise some questions as to what is the right survey lines, where are the property boundary lines? And at its most restrictive, this would look much more like the assessor's map, which would have the bulk of the dock and the platform extending onto someone else's land. At its least restrictive, they would fail the setbacks. And so all of these things, I think, are really good questions that would merit a peer review, which is something that's in the basis for this ZBA. So that's the extent of my comments with respect to the survey and the boundary. I think, again, if there's any other comments about it, I think if there are a few other issues I'd like to address, but I want to stop there and let others have the floor on those issues or any rebuttals from.
Well, first to the board.
The board, sorry.
I think the burden is really on you to demonstrate why this method is inappropriate. You're kind of speculating on things here that the burden is on you, not on the applicant. I think if there's a peer review or a review, you should hire an engineer. It's not up to the applicant to hire an engineer. They've already done that.
And I guess, Paul, a question for you, just for the record and for clarification. So the right and left boundaries were calculated using the same methodology.
So if you look at the land court plan 2896-9, you'll see a dashed line on the boundary line to the left that extends out by direction. So there's already a boundary line defined on the left-hand side and extending out to Little Harbor, which we held since it's already shown on the land court plan as a boundary line. And if you see that closely relates to if you were to apply the colonial method to that line, that boundary line pretty much aligns to that that extension of that line shown on the land court plan. You'll see on that right.
Can you demonstrate by holding the plan up to the screen?
Yeah, sure. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, that would be better.
Help.
So can everybody see this plan here?
Mm-hmm.
So as you can see, the boundary line that's already depicted on the land court plan as it extends out to this concrete monument here is this dashed line here, the darker dashed line. If you were to apply the colonial method, it very closely aligns with that dashed line, but the boundary line has already been determined on the land court plan, which is why we held it in this case here, which could have possibly been done using the colonial method since it's very close in proximity to the colonial method itself.
Paul, is that the gray dashed line? But you're not allowed to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It all has to come to the
I'm
board.
sorry. Would you mind if you ask it? It's hard to differentiate the blue line for the.
We need your name and address.
Sure. My name is Andrew Astley, 45 Druid Place. I was trying to clarify the blue line versus the gray line, which is what I think he was describing.
Paul, can you clarify if you were referring to the blue line or the gray line?
So not the blue line itself. So the boundary line that's shown on the land court plan is this darker dashed line here that extends this concrete bound shown here, which is shown on the land court plan already. The colonial method, if you were to apply it to this location, is this lighter dashed line here, which is very close to the actual boundary line that's already shown on the land court plan.
Sure.
Actually, the 2896-9 plan that we have
But
here
that,
just has one.
why, we have a boundary line over land is the dash line. Why would you use the colonial method to find a different property line over land?
We didn't. We held the dash line from the land court plan.
So what's
Location.
what's the other line?
This is just depicting if we were to use the colonial method for this boundary line.
Well, if you were going to use the colonial method, that would be to determine where the riparian line is, right?
Correct.
So wouldn't you do that, start that at the water line and go from there? So wouldn't you be starting at the end of that dotted line at the edge of the marsh?
In this location here? The edge of the mean high water line or marsh? The colonial line is based off of the original shoreline, which is depicted here as this solid darker line here. There's already a boundary line shown on the land court plans as it extends out to Little Harbor, shown as this darker line, which we held because it's already represented on the land court plan. We did do a calculation based on the colonial method, which is this lighter dashed line, which we did not use. We're just showing that it closely matches up with the land court plan.
Oh, okay, so I'm
reference.
sorry, I was looking at the wrong end here. So you started at mean high water,
Correct.
and that dashed line is going out. Is that mean low water? But at the end of that dashed line, keep going. Yeah.
Yep. So this extends out to the direction of mean low water or over the tidal flats.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, part of the issue that I have is since the property owner owns to mean low water, generally speaking, when we have dock plans, I think the property lines show an extension of the property line from the land, the mean high water all the way out to mean low water. It doesn't use this colonial method to change the direction of the property lines.
Well, there is different. So I think most cases that you see are most rectangular shaped lots, and they generally run perpendicular into the thread of the river or the bank of the waterway. In this case, where we have irregular shaped lots, which all extend out to the waterway, and they would overlap if you were to extend them out and create overlaps throughout each boundary line. And what the colonial method does is basically bisects those overlaps and shares the rights to the waterways, which is the whole purpose of the colonial method, and how they determine your rights to the waterways for all those riparian waterways. If you were to just simply extend out the property lines, you're going to get a series of overlapping property lines for all the abutters, and you cut off all access to the waterways. So that's why it's not appropriate to use that method when you're determining these boundary lines.
Or the pie method.
Yeah, the pie method would be another method. We determined that we wasn't the most appropriate method in this case based on the waterways and the tidal flats.
And tell me again why you don't take accretion or erosion into account.
No, we do. It's just that we have to have a reference point that's fixed to start from, which is what the colonial method does. So it utilizes the original shoreline as that base point. If you were to just take the mean high water line at this time, or another time in the future, you'd have a constantly changing side boundary lines. So what the colonial method does is create a fixed baseline or reference point from the time that the lot was originally created to establish those boundary lines so they don't change over time as they extend out to the waterways, essentially.
Okay.
But we do have additional public comments, so I'll hand it back.
Again, the case law I referenced specifically talks about Massachusetts case law. Boundary lines do move in the state of Massachusetts. They do move based on several factors, including erosion and accretion. And so with respect to the left line, the dotted line that's on the land plan isn't actually, I don't have the piece in front of me, but it's not actually a boundary line, it's meant for directional purposes. And so it says that on one of the land plans, there's a few land plans, but one of them has the boundary marker and the dotted line across that, and it talks about it as not a boundary, but as for directional purposes.
For direction.
Again, I don't have that. That was just something in the research, but again, when we talk about the colonial method on the left-hand side, I appreciate that they showed the line, but again, it's taking from the 1950 original shoreline in contravention of Massachusetts laws, in contravention of the deed. So this is kind of like, I mean, at least in my point of view, it's black and white that if you're going to apply colonial water methodology, it should be applied where the water is, not backdating it to 1950 or 1910, because that's again the laws of Massachusetts. And so also, Mr. Chittick, you had a comment earlier about the burden of proof. I don't agree that that's how the zoning is written. The applicant is applying for a special permit. It's on them to show that there are no adverse effects to property rights, that the boundaries are where they say they are. And so what I'm doing is raising several questions about the reason they chose the methodology, several issues with the application of that methodology. It's on them to prove beyond a doubt that the methodology is sound, that it was soundly applied. Any other comments on this topic?
No, I think you can make, is that all the comments you have in?
For the survey line, yeah.
Okay, is there anything else? I guess
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, if you want to continue and
Yeah.
then,
Alternatively, I think what we've talked about here is the need. I just want to make sure before we completely close this, I need to submit the deed that says the water lines should not be used to calculate boundaries from the land court plans, which is what they did. Also, Mr. McMorris, you'd asked for the case law on accretion and moving boundaries in the state of Massachusetts. I can send that as well.
I think that's a little bit different from what I need to know, though. I guess what I need to know is where do you start, at what point do you begin the calculation for the riparian line? Where the registered land plan shows the property line, or where, land that may have eroded away or accreted? Is that where you start the line? Because I assume that would change the angle some. And I don't think case law as to who owns accreted land is going to help there. It's more a matter of what I assume are accepted practice for surveyors.
I actually think it'll show exactly that, right? It'll show exactly that Massachusetts requires surveys to show moving boundaries. And once the boundary is set, that'll determine where to apply whichever method you choose, whether it's colonial or not. And so I think those cases would directly address the fact that in Massachusetts law, the boundaries do move, accretion and erosion do move them, and how that's applied for the measuring of property line. Because again, they're taking the colonial method at the end of the property line. Where does that start and stop is based on the Massachusetts laws here, rather than the general book on survey across the US. And so I think they will be directly applicable. There's also a question here.
I'm not sure when you want me to speak and not speak, but David, the land court, there's a difference between recorded land and registered land. And
Right.
Registered land adjudicates property boundaries.
Correct.
This property boundary doesn't move because the land court plan is adjudicated what it is. The answer to your question about what, where do we begin, I think was kind of loosely just the question. Paul has already answered that. Paul answered that you begin at the intersection of the two properties. That's his determination.
The
Right?
intersection of the two properties on the registered land plan.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the answer to the question that we have. Mr. What's your last name again?
Nelson.
Mr. Nelson, he's not a land surveyor. So you pose that question to him, and if he doesn't have a land surveyor behind him answering the question, then it's just speculation. It's speculation that you're getting caught up in versus an expert that we have who's determined this plan. And so I'm having a bit of an issue with posing a question to Mr. Nelson who's not qualified to answer it.
I'm not posing the question.
And that gets right to Woody's point, which is if he's going to put forward this issue, he has to come forward with that expert. It's his burden, not mine. I already have information, or already have a stamp plan in front of you, which is a registered land plan. The reason why the property was surveyed to the registered land plan is because the land court does not register land that moves. It does not register land beyond into the water. It's a policy across the board. Brendan's here. I'm sure Brendan can answer the question. The land court does not go into the water with respect to surveying the property, but Massachusetts law does. Massachusetts law goes to mean low water. How we determine that is based on what Paul has put forward in front of you as best as he could. The insinuation that we just chose this particular method because it was the most self-serving method is not true, because we didn't foresee this issue coming. We weren't even thinking about zoning when he did this survey. He did this survey for conservation, and it wasn't an issue. The other thing I would say about Mr. Nelson is that, with all due respect to him, I'm not certain that he's even a lawyer in the state of Massachusetts. So I don't know if he's qualified to interpret Massachusetts law, but the whole reason why there is
case law on accretion and erosion is to change property lines. You can't change this property line. This property line is fixed, it's registered, it is absolutely 100% adjudicated as it is. Extrapolating out to mean low water is what we're discussing here, which is the non-registered portion of this ownership. And that's what Paul has done. And he's answered the question as to why you don't just push the line straight forward, because you would cut off access and you would have multiple properties that overlap, not out to mean low water.
Right, I understand that, Jeff, but and I wasn't addressing the question to Mr. Nelson. I was addressing the question to try to get a clear understanding of how all of this gets calculated, because it makes a difference in how we can decide things. Because if it's calculated in a way that's not correct, the boundary line could be in a different place. And let me ask you this. Let's say there's 10 feet of accreted land along the shoreline there, along the mean high water line. Are you telling me that this landowner doesn't own that land because the property line is fixed by the plan that was registered?
I've run into this issue in my practice. So what happens is that the land court plan is what it is, it's fixed, okay? But because Massachusetts law says that you own to mean low water, the portion of the land which is owned is registered and unregistered, if that makes any sense. So you have the registered land that goes to, as the land court plan shows it on this -9 plan. And then the Astleys still own to mean low water. That portion of the ownership, which is not registered, is actually unregistered. And that is what we're talking about. So if your question is does he own, does he own the accreted land? He owns the accreted land if it's within his property boundaries.
Okay.
It's not as if the survey changed. It's not as if the ownership changes, right? It's just a question of how do you extrapolate this property line out to mean low water? If within that area there's accreted land, there's accreted land.
It changes the whole line of the intertidal borders. I know he owns out to mean low water, and mean low water doesn't change, but mean high water changes if the land accretes or if the land erodes.
The registered land doesn't change. The registered land is what it is. And that's why you go to the registered land when you're determining the method, right? Because that's where it was laid out. You need a baseline. You can't do this without a baseline.
Okay, that's what I want to know. I want to know where that authority comes from. Did you use the registered land line to determine the riparian right?
I think it's in the materials that Paul has given you, right?
It's because the land court plans depict the original shoreline, the original mean high water line.
That I understand.
Yep.
So you'd like me to research how we determine the baseline?
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be,
notwithstanding the materials that were already provided on that particular issue.
There's got to be, well, the question has arisen about whether or not the line is correct if there has been accreted land. Maybe there hasn't been, and if there hasn't been, it doesn't matter. But I think that it's important here that we know where the boundary lines are, both for the land and for the riparian line. And I've never seen this come up before. I'm not arguing with you. I'm asking to be educated about it.
No.
So that we make the right decision.
And I know I have an argumentative tone to me. It's slightly frustrating, and I think it's partially because I'm having a difficult time articulating myself. But if you're talking about accreted land, okay, let's say in your hypothetical 10 feet, right? Let's say 10 feet of land has been added to our quote upland. Right? Number one, if it's within our property boundaries between our two sidelines, it's always been owned by us, right?
Right.
But what the reason why what you're getting caught up on is where do you determine where the baseline is so that you could determine how to extrapolate the line from there, utilizing either the colonial method or the pine method or some other method.
Exactly.
Right.
I'm not saying that you shouldn't be using the colonial method.
Right.
And I'm not saying that, you've got to have the riparian line drawn from somewhere. It's just, I'm just questioning what the authority is to draw it from the 1950 plan rather than where the land actually is now.
I understand the question. I'll endeavor to try and find the answer. I'm not sure I'll be able to, but I'll try. But I just want to appeal to your logical sense is if we're, what is the boundary today if 10 feet accreted might not be the boundary after a storm tomorrow?
Yep.
And so how do you draw the baseline tomorrow versus today? So the whole reason why you have to go to some baseline set forth in a plan is because you've got to go to the source where we know it's fixed, where it was surveyed to, right? It would make no logical sense to go to a hypothetical point of accreted land 10 feet beyond this, just so that that line changes again in the future when there's another physical change or storm.
Right.
You must go to the original boundary that we're talking about that establishes the side yard in the first instance between the two properties in order to then move from there, whether there was an accretion or an erosion or not. And that's just logical.
It makes logical sense to me. I understand it completely. It seems to me that that's probably maybe not just the best, but the only way to do it. I would just like to see something that says that.
Understood. Are we done with the comments?
Well, I simply would like to say, I'd like to hear or read an authoritative counter argument from a registered engineer land surveyor. I could speculate, all night long about whether this seems right or not. I'd like to hear a registered engineer come and say the colonial method is terrible, it should never be used, so on and so forth. And these guys, didn't know what they were doing. That's a little harsh, but this doesn't take me anyplace because I've heard one side has prepared an stamped engineering plan survey, and the other side is not, or the other counter argument is not. It's just comments and speculation. Yeah, go ahead. So.
Two things. First, Mr. McMorris, I'll address your question. I think council made some good points. You have to start somewhere. You absolutely start with the land court and the land documents. But when it comes to water boundaries, those must be surveyed. And so Grady Consulting did a survey and they found the current mean high water mark. And so they should use the current mean high water mark in accordance with Massachusetts state law to determine where the water boundaries are. And if there is a storm, that's something called avulsion. Avulsion is different than accretion, which is different than erosion. And so I just understand that, Mr. Morris, that's the starting spot. You should survey and then find out where that is. My second point, Mr. Chick, I completely understand. And, I see my role as asking questions on a bunch of things that don't line up to me. And I asked 8 questions in my letter from 3 weeks ago, and there was no mention of accretion. There was no mention of upland versus mean low water versus highland. There was no meaningful discussion of why the two property boundaries cross across each other on 2 stamped survey plans for at least 7 feet. There's just none of those answers. And when we've come here and asked them, it keeps coming back to this colonial method. there's 3 different reasons why it's being misapplied, when I'm asking these questions and there aren't answers still. And so the board has the opportunity under Article 11, which we'll get to ask for a peer review. But again, the burden of proof isn't on me to prove their plan is wrong. I'm raising questions as to why all of these inaccuracies that I've researched and asked about aren't being answered. This is in some instances, the 4th or 5th time I've asked these questions and there's no answer. And so the burden of proof for the special permit is on the applicant, not me raising questions to go out and combat it. If you're satisfied to a sufficient degree, then that's okay. But again, that's the burden. So I understand it. Good. I want to go to a separate topic. Mr. McMorris, you had mentioned at the outset that the zoning that ZBA isn't concerned with easements. And so I with respect to setbacks, but the special permit for a dock, specifically zoning bylaw 302.1, with respect to private boat docks, says a single dock for the private use of the owner of land which is constructed, located such that it will not adversely affect the property of abutters. The easement is a right in property, right? I'm not the neighbor directly adjacent. I'm the neighbor across the street, as council said. It's absolutely true.
It's a right over property. It's not a right of property.
It's a property right of transit and use.
Correct.
And so any adverse effect to that property right would absolutely, in my opinion, be within the zoning board's right to hear and adjudicate. Just like if you had a driveway easement and someone was trying to make substantial, you wouldn't say, that if it negatively impacts the driveway easement or a utility easement, that it shouldn't be considered at all. Of course, there's adverse effects. And so that's specifically what's addressed here, not only broadly across the PA laws, but specifically for private docks. And that was done to recognize the fact that this is a valuable water property right, both to use it for any of the means, and those were submitted to the board here. And so I don't agree, and just the plain reading of this, and I'm about to do more research in case law if you'd like to see it, but as someone who has an interest in property, which is the easement, any adverse effect should be and can be adjudicated by the ZBA.
Well, have you presented any information or any data to support that comment?
Well, I have presented the actual black letter law from the ZBA piece, and then I think 3 different reasons why there's adverse effect. And the standard for adverse effect is very, very high. It's not minimized or shall be minimal. It is no adverse effect. So if there is an adverse effect, even small, against a property right by the building of a dock, then by rule for ZBA, it should be denied. And so I would just ask the commission to use a reasonable person standard. Just what would a reasonable person say?
Why don't you, for the benefit of our hearing, go over the points you're making? How is this, which elements are adversely affected?
Yes, absolutely. And that was in the letter on the first page.
It may be, but this is a public hearing and
Sure.
we should get it out.
Yeah, absolutely. There are specifically 3 adverse impacts. The first is the actual use of the right of way. And so to walk to the right of way to access mean high water comes with all of the things that you can do at mean high water, which is public tidelands. And so for me, that specifically would include launching a watercraft. And so if you want to launch a watercraft at mean high water line, this dock floating platform, which again, the picture is there with some like rough measurements as to feet, at like the distance away are there. And so we talk about that as adversely impacting it. If I'm trying to launch a kayak in any sort of weather, and any sort of current, and any sort of tide, it's incredibly obstructive to do that. And that's if there's no boat dock. If there's a boat dock, then it's directly in front of these. And so when we talk about use, we talk about launching a kayak, talk about fishing, right? If you're fishing in Litter Harbor, suddenly the entire right side is blocked by a dock, or rather a ramp, a floating platform, and at least a boat. And so you've cut off half of that ability to use that for fishing. And I think I'd also add for swimming. I think swimming is a little less likely there, but that's another piece. But more specifically, it would be launching the kayak, which is how I've used that, or small watercraft, the fishing. and also the views. And so if we think about the sort of the third piece would be the views and bird watching. And there's some pictures submitted there. And then the last piece, and I addressed this later in the article too, or in the letter as well, but flood control. So this entire marsh is prone to flooding. So is the roadway. So is my house. And so I'm incredibly cautious of any change to the underground topography from multiple pilings inside this marsh. And so between having difficulty launching a kayak without crashing into the dock, without crashing into a boat, enjoying it for fishing and several other uses, I really think that there is an adverse impact. And if the CBA thinks that, well, there is an impact, but it's small, that violates the rule of no adverse impact.
Well, all right, I'm really having a hard time understanding your logic. Rite of passage is a rite of passage. It doesn't say it's a right to launch boats, kayaks, or anything else. You're speculating as to views. How will they be adversely impacted? It's not your view. You have a right to walk along this right of way. That's what it is.
I do have the right of way, but I don't agree that there isn't a right to fish, fowl, and I forget the other term of art within the state of Massachusetts.
Well, I'd like to see you prove how you would be unable to fish and fowl.
Yeah, and I believe that was in either the most recent letter or the one before that, that actually showed the dimensions of the floating platform as it stands relative to where the actual easement would end. And so if I'm standing on the shoreline, the ramp and the dock are here, and they materially impact my ability to do anything in that area. And I added what you're allowed to do in that because this committee asked for it last time.
Maybe you should be going to the state for a Chapter 91 license.
The Mass DP 91 license has concurrent jurisdiction here.
We have no jurisdiction below mean high water.
Well, I'm talking about impact on the right to use the property easement.
It's irrelevant in my estimation. This board.
I don't agree. I believe the zoning board has the authority to adjudicate adverse effects to property rights. There's a property right here. I've showed that.
I agree. I do think that our bylaw regarding docks does add a little bit of advantage for abutters, more than just the general special permit standards. But they have to be actual real impacts. And the third one that you were trying to think of is navigation, and that's really the one that you're concerned about, I think. But we'll go from there.
And I think I had submitted again, like what that would mean for navigation, trying to get in and out of there with the boat.
Yeah, I heard your argument about it.
The next topic I wanted to address was, so in 2024, my understanding is that the ZBA law changed to add Article 11. And so Article 11 talks about any construction subject to a special permit. It's considered a development of significant impact. And so this dock would require a special permit under section, or it requires a special permit under section 300.9. That's just a normal dock, but a dock permit in Cohasset is a special permit. And if you're asking for a special permit, then the new Article 11 is triggered by that. In section 311.3 talks about all of the requirements for a special permit under applicant 11. I addressed this in the letter. I addressed this at the last public hearing. There's been no reply from the applicant on any of these sub-issues within this broad article, inclusive of the fact that the abutting property is a historic place on the National Register, which has its own implications. It's discussed at the last public hearing, but there's been no comment from the applicant. And so
Why don't you spell out the implications of being on the National Register?
Yes, so the implications for being on the National Register, there are heightened requirements for what can happen near it. And so under ZBA Article 11, the Cohasset rule, it has a heightened requirement next to grave sites, including marked grave sites. And so this commission, the ZBA, would have to decide what that entails, what those heightened requirements So that's a positive duty on ZBA to think about what that means to decide and set that rule. And so that's just specifically on the historic resources. Other ones are environmental and natural resources. There's been no discussion. Infrastructure impacts, water drainage. Again, this is another reference to abutting properties and property rights here, in addition to the section that I referenced a few minutes ago. And so all of these are positive duties on the applicant to be addressed, and none of them have been addressed. And so any application that doesn't address Article 11 at all, which is required by rule, is incomplete.
Well, let's say that I'm the applicant, hypothetically, and I say, no, there is no impact, no adverse impact on environmental, scenic, or natural resources. End of story. There's no impact on the town's historic resources. End of story. Then what?
Well, if they wanted to submit that, then they would have addressed Article 11.
Well,
and that would be up to the CBA to decide if.
Okay, but a simple statement like that, there is no impact.
I mean, I honestly don't have an opinion on what the standard in bar is. But this is a new rule that specifically addressed docks. None of it was addressed. With respect to the National Register of National Register, excuse me, that one, I believe there is a set rule where the commission should be engaged, although I don't see it here in my notes, but again, section 311.3 is a whole list of elements, none of which are addressed here. It's called the Development Impact Assessment.
I do think in general, right, section that Article 11, when it was put forward, is put forward for like really high impact projects in town, like that required blasting operations, and they wanted to make sure that there was like a construction plan associated with that spoke to those impacts and kind of how they'd be mitigated. I think in like a dock situation, just with the small area of square footage with the pilings and relatively small height in comparison to major projects, it's a little bit less applicable. I mean, I think it's good to flag, but I think a lot of the pieces in that article are meant for projects well beyond the scope of, a dock construction.
That may be, but that's not how it's written. It's any of these special, the rule, Article 11 specifically accepts certain permits. Docks are not accepted. Docks are included in that. And so while it may be smaller than building, say, multifamily housing right next to a national register, this still does have a meaningful impact on the views in the adjacent national storm. And the pictures were submitted, but you can see how it's all marsh, and now it's a dock that stands at, I think, 10 or so feet high above the land. And again, this is a requirement of a complete application. So if there's a subsequent letter that says, to your point, Mr. Chittick, which is fair, there is no environment and natural resource impact, and that's the end of it. If the ZBA takes that on face value, then of course, yeah, agree.
Well, why don't you continue, and then we'll have you go through your comments, and then we'll move it along.
So what I'm asking, thank you. So what I'm asking for is, what I'm pointing out to the ZBA is this is the requirement and it's not addressed. It's been addressed in public hearing, my letter. There's just no response again. The next topic, I think, I'm actually going to table, but with respect to setbacks, I think all of the setback requirements are really focused on where the property line is. We've had enough of that conversation, I think, for today. You're welcome. Just kidding. And then the last piece here is around the dimensions. And so this was addressed very briefly last time, but the requirements for dimensions of a dock are not to exceed 200 square feet for docks of glass. DEP has a rule that cuts off between 600 square feet for different types of applications for the 91. And so this dock is, I think, as high as 700, more than 700 feet.
No jurisdiction.
700 square feet between the between the pier, which is on land, the ramp, which is in that intertidal zone, and then the platform. And so based on just the plain reading of the ZBA rules, this dock is too big. 700 square feet versus a requirement of 200 square feet. I think the comment was made last time that there's not jurisdiction, but this is an accessory structure that goes from, again, upland through from upland all the way to behind water and into the intertidal zone. And
But
so
what is that 200 square feet? What does it apply to?
The dock structure, let's see, sorry, I have it here. It's a non-residential structure such as private boat docks, provided, however, that the same private boat docks do not exceed 20 feet in height, which this doesn't, or 200 square feet in total ground coverage. This was the
Okay.
issue last time.
That's the issue. The ground coverage is the piers,
So
not the dock. It's the piers that cover the ground, that go into the ground.
And so if that's true, I think there's two implications.
It is true. It's true. Take it as true.
Can I just point out the implications, Matt?
We've been dealing with this for 50 years. We know what the implications are. That's ground coverage. The ground coverage we calculate by the number of piers above mean high water. If it's less than 200, which it always is, it's not an issue.
So that would mean that docks of thousands of square feet would be permitted if you're only counting the pilings. That definition also is contradictory. Looks to me to
take a look
Massachusetts State.
Take a look at half of the docks in town, and you'll understand how the calculations are done.
Oh,
There are other
agree
factors. There are other factors that go into it, but as far as ground coverage, that's how ground coverage is calculated. We don't really need to discuss it any further.
Okay. Okay, I think that's it for public comment. I've got a long list of research to do. I think most especially would be the deed that prohibits establishing water boundaries. The deed that specifically precludes using land court plans to establish water boundaries, which I think is the main issue we spent time today, along with the court cases for everyone.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Are there any other public comments?
Just one from, I think the members have touched on it too, but we do have a submitted plan from a design professional, and it is difficult for non-design professionals to question those plans, and it shouldn't be held to that standard. It should be done by another design professional. If they're going to do, we have the same code issues in the building department when we have a structural engineer that they put a stamp on it. They've basically put their livelihood on the line to say, yes, this is correct. And if it's going to be questions or overseen, it should be done by someone else in that field, professional to professional. Yes, but that's just a comment on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess just from my own standpoint, I agree with that, typically, and that is how we do see it. I think the only thing that's a little bit different with this case, and maybe why some of the public comment has gone on for the length that it has, is this new methodology, something that we really haven't seen, and I think there's some questions about why it was implemented. So it's probably gone on for as long as it has for that reason. But I appreciate the comment nonetheless. Any other comments from the board? So I do know that we do not have a draft decision. So our typical practice on this, I know the applicant was hoping that that we would close the case tonight, open to discussing with the board, but our typical practice when we don't have a drafted decision is that we would continue the decision until the draft is made and then deliberate, close at the next hearing. I'm also mindful, I guess today's December 1st, so we're coming into the holiday season. We typically, our next meeting's on January 5th, so we typically have, like a 2-week prior submittal date, but wanted to see too, maybe the board would entertain discussing, whether it's like a week from Friday, which would be December 12th, to have any final materials submitted to give us time, to review it.
Right,
Just-
anything
I
that
don't
doesn't
see
come,
coming
anything that
right
doesn't
before
come in by
holiday.
then is not going to be considered.
Yeah.
We just can't speed read here and,
So.
half an hour's notice.
Do you mind on behalf of the applicant?
Yep.
They can hear me.
And I guess let me reiterate first, we would normally continue it because we don't have a drafted decision.
I understand.
And when we do continue it, people have, I guess, an opportunity if they so choose to submit any additional comments.
I get it. We were here in November, it might have been November 1st, I'm not sure. But Mr. Nelson has had an opportunity to hire somebody and provide this board with an expert opinion. Bring that person here, hasn't done it. So now we're talking about extending this period of time yet again for us to respond to comments when the standard is, are we adversely impacting the water quality or the natural drainage of the water course? I have responded to his letter, not every point, because I didn't think every point was relevant, and I'm not obligated to respond to him. I'm obligated to provide the board with materials it needs to make a decision. I think that this board has already given Mr. Nelson enough time to come forward with somebody. And since he hasn't, I'm really reticent to continue this hearing again, to be in the same situation I am now, a month from now. This is your own zoning application called it a simplified dock application. This isn't what the zoning bylaw in section 11 intended to go through this process. You guys all know that too. I mean, you were here during the discussion at town meeting. There are time requirements for zoning decisions, and I guess right now I'm confronted with, do I agree to a continuance? Like, do I think that perhaps it makes sense, after hearing the discussion that you've heard, especially you, David, like, are you satisfied that you have the materials in front of you to make a decision? You have a survey. You have an explanation for the survey, which you never get in writing with a boundary line plan. It's not changing. We're not.
No, I'm
So if you got.
I know what we have for a record in front of us. We don't consider things that aren't in the record. We don't consider things that aren't proper or certified. So we've got in front of us what we need to have in front of us to make a decision. I agree with that. I still am not completely comfortable with how we determine the riparian boundaries. I'd like to see the cases that are out there. But unless there's something that's surprises me, I think we have everything that we need. The one thing though is one of the things that Mr. Nelson raised was the historic district thing. I think you have to say something about it. I think you've got to address each section of the zoning bylaw that applies to this application. And if that section applies to this application, you've got to at least say something. But I would,
I think they've addressed the environmental impact and lack thereof, the water quality, but maybe not the historic
Personally, I'm not sure how far the historic district. Well, actually, it's not an historic district by state, it's on the National Register. Cemetery is.
Right.
And I believe it ends with the boundary line of the property. But, I'm not
Yeah, I
sure.
wouldn't, I don't disagree with that, but I think he has to say this doesn't affect it. It's got to have something in the record that it addresses that piece.
I always thought that the National Historic Register got you a plaque on your wall outside, and that was about it. But
Well, it does, except that we have a piece in the zoning bylaw that talks about it. So I think it does have to be addressed. I don't think it has to have any lot of big proof or anything. Right. But our standard practice is to continue to have a draft decision prepared before the next hearing, to take anything that comes in between now and then and look at it. And then at the next hearing, close it and vote on the decision, which is exactly the same amount of time that if we closed it tonight, we still wouldn't be voting on a decision until the next meeting. So it doesn't change the timeline at all. I would be happier to continue it, get any last pieces of information that people want to put in the record and go from there.
It does change the timeline if all of a sudden Mr. Nelson comes forward with yet more speculative information or more argumentative information that then I have to deal with. And I sit here and you guys tell me, oh, deal with that or something else. Like, I think that you have the ability to close the hearing to the public comment, subject to me responding and writing to whatever your issues are that you articulate to me, and call it a day. It's gonna affect the timing, because I'm gonna be sitting here next month with another situation where additional information is put forward in front of this board, and around we go the merry-go-round again.
Well, that may well be true, Jeff, but
So, I mean, you
we've-
put
we've got-
parameters on it.
we've got an obligation to consider everything that is pertinent to the application. And, if he puts in another 100 pages of stuff and we decide that any of it is relevant, then we're going to ask you for your comment on it. If it's just a lot of what we have so far, then
That's my
probably, then not, but I want to look at the cases that he has, and any cases that you want to send over for us to look at. And,
what's your timeline, deadline?
Yeah, I was gonna propose that December 12th, which would be a week from this Friday, be the deadline on submittals.
Sure. That seems reasonable.
Is that the right day, Julia? I think.
Yes.
Right.
yeah, I think,
That way they were not, receiving something over the holiday and don't have time to review.
but Jeff, I understand that this is dragging on a lot longer than you feel like it should, but keep in mind, this isn't the only property around Little Harbor. And I want to make sure that we're dealing with it the right way, because if it comes up again, I want to make sure we're dealing with it the same way.
I
Although,
understand. Yep.
although it does seem like everybody else already has a dock, so.
Yeah, it does. It seems like it's already been dealt with, maybe in varied ways. Okay.
Just to confirm, is this deadline for both the applicant and public?
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's try to assimilate what it is actually you guys want to see. Okay, David, you want to see some case law dealing with how do you calculate the baseline, right?
Yeah. And, dealing with the colonial method, basically. Where do you start when you start to calculate it, and what does it mean?
Okay.
State of Massachusetts.
State of Massachusetts historical districts, right?
Yep. Say something.
Okay.
Well, this property is not in an historical district.
I know it's not. then that might be the response potentially.
Oh, okay.
And also the flood issue. Because that is a zoning issue that's before us.
So section 11, which is the flood issue, the determining the baseline and if there's any case law for that.
And that would be Massachusetts case law?
Of course. And the historic issue.
Yep.
All right.
And then, Brian, you,
Clarifying question. So if I'm submitting just a few things for the 12th, I don't know how the timing works for them to reply to it, because they need to read it and then reply to it.
No, everything's going to be in by the 12th. That's it.
They can comment on something on the 13th. They can comment on the 13th, but it has to have been in on the 12th, period.
And
And
so.
there won't be a back and forth.
So how should they reply to my issues?
They're replying to us.
yeah, it'll all go through Julia. And some of the stuff they may not reply to, but it'll be, the board's.
And if I read their submission on the 12th, on the 13th, I don't know how I address it here.
It'd be best to do through Julia on, via email prior.
Because I made the mistake today by not forwarding it, the deed with the language. I just don't want to, I don't want anyone to be forced to read something right.
Yeah. Yeah, if you have materials, submit them to Julia and then she submits them to the board as all. And then if there is some back and forth, although it sounds like, there may not be, too much dialogue back and forth, but the board itself will have an opportunity to review all the materials, whether, in other words, I don't want you to think you'll have an answer to every one of your questions by the applicant. That won't be grounds for a continuance, but if the board reviews the materials and feels like that there's some, significant issues there that should be clarified or addressed, we can also ask through Julia for a response. I think we'll look for a motion.
Okay, I'd make a motion to continue this hearing until January 5th.
Second.
Okay,
Second.
made and seconded. All in favor, Matt Watkins, David Morris,
Aye.
Woody Chick,
Aye.
Lee Garst,
Aye.
Leo Hernandez.
Aye.
Thank you, John. Steering. Just a new hearing for 141 South Main Street. It's an application for a special permit for the expansion front entrance pursuant to sections 308.3 and 309.4. Brendan, if you're going to be the applicant, stand to this microphone, you can identify yourself, the answer for, correct?
Thank you. For the record, Brendan Saul with Mr. Brendan Sullivan with Merrill Engineers and Land Surveyors. Here with the applicant's confidence in Mayor Pastor of 141 South Main Street. There'll be no colonial. So the 141 is a single-family home positioned on the west side of South Main Street, just a few doors down from Summer Street and Spring Street, just north of that, pretty much right across the street from the Catholic Church parking lot. It's a pre-existing non-conforming lot with regard to lot area. All the other requirements are met. It's in the Residence A district, approximately 17,600 square feet, or 18,000 fire. The house was constructed approximately 1859 at another location. It was an old schoolhouse. And it was moved to its current position, approximately, 1900. I do have some, some pictures for the existing house taken in front.
I know the house.
So we are in a flood zone with regard to the river that goes into the estuary across the street. We are in an AE 9 floodplain. The lot basically encompasses the entire lot. The lot is basically elevation 6.5-ish, right around there. So the entire lot is in the floodplain. What we're proposing to do is basically add an entrance to the property. As you can see from the photo, there was the initial property when the house was moved, when the schoolhouse was moved, it was a 2-family. That's why there's 2 doors in the front of the property. When the Astors bought the property in the early 1990s, they wanted to combine those, and actually they did. They were granted a variance to do the same exact construction as these architectural plans that dated 1994. They were granted a variance to construct this in 1995 for a setback of 14.5 feet, but the requirement is 20 feet.
Was the variance for that construction, or was the variance to convert a 2-family to a 1-family?
No, the variance was just the construction of this. It
wasn't a use, it was a.
No, it wasn't a use of a dimension variance, yeah. And so what the Astros wanted to do was basically convert it to a single-family home. And with the 2 doorways in the front of the house, and when you enter the house, so there was a divide line down the middle of the house. That's why the 2 separate doorways. And you walk in either doorway, and so you walk in the left doorway, there's a stairway on your right. You walk in the right doorway, there's a stairway on your left. Well, there was a divider wall down the middle of the house that was non-structural. So they were able to take that doorway down, take that wall down. Now there's one main entryway with a stairway that goes up to the 2nd story. So this plan gave them a little more space between the bottom toe of the stairway and where the front door is. It would also eliminate 1 door and just make 1 grand entrance. That was the whole idea back when they bought the place, with 4 children and a mother-in-law living there. And so there were a lot sort of interior changes to the house as well to be done. In the back of the house, combining two kitchens to 1, more living area, like I said, removing that interior wall, all that interior construction. Well, unfortunately, this construction fell to the wayside. So they never acted on that variance that was granted in 1995. So now kids are grown, out of the house. So here we are today looking to put that grand entrance back into the house. Oddly enough, the original variance was just based on this architectural plan. There was no survey plan involved. And the original variance was to get the front yard setback down to 14.5 feet. And that was assuming the front of the house was got the front yard setback to 20 feet. Well, from the today's survey, we have the front yard setback to the main dwelling as 25.7 feet. So actually the structure, the main structure itself is conforming. But what is not conforming is the front yard setback with regard to the stairs. Because the stairs are more than 6 feet away from the foundation, you're not allowed to extend those stairs any further than that. So the front yards, the stairways, the bottom of the stairway right now is at 16.2 feet from the front yards, from the front line. So that renders the structure pre-existing non-conforming. That's why we're here for a special permit and not a variance. So with the addition of the portico and the enclosure and the stairs that we need to get down to grade, our front yard setback to the bottom of the stairs will go down to 11.1 feet. So that's like I said, so we're going, the existing stairway stops at 16.2. We're going down to 11.1 to, you know, obviously we're bumping the front out a little bit, so that makes those stairways further closer to the street. So that's why we're looking for that special permit. Other than that, is so the relief from 16.2 to 11.1, and also the work is in the floodplain. There is an existing concrete apron that encompasses both doorways in the front of the dwelling. That will be taken out. But there is an increase in footprint within the floodplain. I believe it's just over 200 square feet, where the existing is just over 100. I think that just about covers everything.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll start with board questions. Yeah, I know when I initially took a look at the application, I was taking a look, like you mentioned, the setback from the foundation is 25.7, and setback from the concrete block is 21.1. So I guess my original take on it was like, is this, you know, was it a non-conformity in the front, or was it a you know, conforming structure with a permitted projection being, you know, the stairs? But I do know in the definition, like you mentioned, it does speak to the 6 feet. But that's kind of the math I was looking at in the front. Was this actually a conforming home that had the block, and then the kind of, as maybe if the stairs grew on it, has become now a non-conformity, which would kind of put you into the variance territory, which is why I was kind of looking at those numbers a bit. So, I mean, the definition of a permitted projection is an unenclosed entry, porch, steps, and bulkhead, which do not project more than 6 feet beyond the line of the foundation wall, do not exceed 30 square feet in area, with a landing not over 4 feet in height, and no closer to the property line than 6 feet. So that was my only thing. I kind of wanted to see, you know, how you presented it, but I think my first take on it was like, is this actually adding a new conformity and a new non-conformity being the front setback because of, you know, where that foundation is and where that initial block was, kind of the stairs go off of that block. But I think kind of your presentation speaks to the fact that the stairs and everything we're all kind of part of the front entranceway, and you're kind of, I guess, hanging your hat, so to speak, on the 6 feet portion of it, if I understand it
Right, yeah.
You can see what the other board members say. I think the only other thing was sometimes when we have a decision in our like a past decision, we will get that in our packets. I don't know if we, because this is 1995, if we still have that around, but it would be good if we could see that decision, and if it came with the exhibits. This is it.
Yep, that's the decision.
Oh.
Like I said, the only plan that was referenced is the architectural plan. That was this plan here.
Yeah.
David, we can't see this.
I can send you a PDF of this as well.
Are we allowed to accept these during the meeting?
Actually, our records, so, but we can.
It is,
It's town record.
it's in the ZBA folder.
I think those are the two things but I guess having the two front doors and one an entryway makes sense to me. You know, just kind of taking a look at the scale of it, and does the scale of it make sense, is something that we would look at as the ZBA. And then kind of that question I asked about like, are we on board with the front being existing non-conformity?
Well, that's to their advantage.
Yes, it is.
What?
I said, yes, it is. If it was within the permitted projection, that would need a variance, but fortunately it's not, so it only needs a special permit. I can't see how this would adversely affect anything in the neighborhood.
Any comments?
I thought the package of information that was presented was very clear. And I do think that their proposed renovations would be consistent with the neighborhood. And actually when you do drive by their house, you assume it is a two-family house. And I think that the conversion will fit with the neighborhood. As I said, I thought that the material included in the packet was very clear, and Brendan's um, presentation clarified the proposal.
No further comment?
I guess, yeah, I would make one comment, is, does it have to be quite this large? I know that the diagram, the drawings were done 30 years ago, and that's fine, but it's big. And you're all, I don't know.
What the living space, actually only comes out approximately 5 feet from the front. And the rest of it is ornamental to kind of make up for the interior with the roof structure. So does it have to be? Maybe not, but it's what they wanted. So as I tell my clients, always ask for what you want. If that answers your question.
Yeah, and I assume what this was at one point a stamped plan that
I think there's a stamp on it, John. Fell from the bottom.
do we have anyone on Zoom that has any questions? Anyone in the audience that wishes to speak?
Just a general comment, they are doing work currently now, they finished the bathroom not too long ago, obtained a permit, followed the plans, and currently doing work on the back that, which they obtained a permit for, following the plans, so. Yeah, we track record.
Okay. We don't have any.
You
The only
could
question-
also maybe make note of the fact that if you start at St. Anthony's and go into town to the Red Lion, there are, there's the Carr's house, Tina Watson's house that probably come closer to the front lot line. So it's a mixed bag, about half the houses conform and half don't.
Right.
And I know we don't take aesthetics into account, but I think that this addition is going to make the house look much more attractive. Not that it doesn't look good now, but
Well, yeah, they don't do anything with their yard. If they would just pay a little attention to the greenery.
yeah, don't mess up the flowers, please.
They're out there 10 hours a day and not letting you in.
The only question I had is that do the neighbors have any comment on this? Have you talked to them at all?
Have you talked to your neighbors at all?
No, not really.
There's a single family home to the south, and the archdiocese, I believe, still owns the not the Vatican, the
Oh, they are too.
The rectory, to the north.
Yeah, it's not a requirement. We just sometimes will ask if the plans have been shared. Like you said, the abutters were noticed for the meeting.
You know, and this comment has absolutely nothing to do with why you're in front of us, but I was always under the impression that there were two doors because this was a substitute schoolhouse at one point, was it not? The boys went in one door and the girls went in the other? Or is that just mythology?
We don't know. What the two doors to us is the legacy of
Being a two-family, yeah.
That's where we're variable needs, it needs to be read.
Oh, yeah, no, I just said it has nothing to do with your application.
I don't, we're not sure because we've never really seen pictures.
Oh, okay, no, just curiosity.
Well, do we have a motion to continue the hearing?
Yeah, I'd make a motion to continue the hearing to January 5th. Time we would consider discuss a decision.
Okay, so moved. Have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, Matt Watkins, aye. David Morris,
Aye.
Woody Chidick,
Aye.
Lee Darst.
Aye.
Leah Fernandez.
Aye.
All right, so yeah, that's our typical practice, and so we would, we don't require anything additional of you, but we continue the hearing. We would typically have a draft decision at the next hearing. We would review, deliberate, and make a decision. Thank you.
Was, Charlie doing?
How's he doing?
Yeah.
I said he's on the recovery, on the rebound.
Well, I guess, but what are the amputees?
Take a fall.
Who are we talking
Charlie.
about? Charlie, yeah. I thought he had. What does Charlie have? Was it a gallbladder or what is?
Public meeting. We haven't closed the meeting and gone off the record.
I'm searching for my agenda here.
Couple of minutes.
Okay, as far as administrative, we don't have any deliberation, closed hearings. We do have the meeting minutes in front of us from 10/27/25. Those included both Elm Street as well as Joy Place. So I know I wasn't physically at those meetings, so probably won't vote on the minutes themselves, although I have reviewed the tape. But did anyone have any comments on those meeting minutes?
I think they were accurate. I read through them and it was a long meeting, and I think that Julia did a very good job distilling the discussions that took place at that meeting.
I agree with Lee's comments.
Okay, could we have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from October 27th?
Go ahead.
Motion to approve the meeting minutes from October 27th.
Second.
Moved and seconded. David Morris,
Aye.
Lee Darth,
Aye.
Woody Chidick,
Aye.
Leah Fernandez.
Aye.
I think I abstained on those ones because I wasn't there.
Oh,
I don't. I reviewed the tape, so I don't know if that counts.
well, we had enough, the requisite votes anyway.
Yeah, the next item on the agenda is ZBA engineering accounts to close. So it looks like this engineering deposits for a number of different parcels that we're looking to kind of.
Maybe Julia could give us a minute, explain what's happened. There's been a change.
Are they able to hear me? So, Cassandra Thayer, the town planner, advised that we should close out these ZBA engineering accounts that are outstanding for past projects, where engineering, peer review fees were collected. And now that that's not a standard practice for the board to collect those fees initially with incoming applications, it was removed from your fee schedule last fall. I think due to, it wasn't a common approach for project reviews. There are a few projects that still have outstanding balances that need to be released, and our accounting department is trying to clean up some of those accounts that still have balances. So that is the summary for this bullet, and we're hoping that we can have you review these and either vote to close and release the fees and totals that should go back to the applicants.
We've done this similarly in the planning board too, for some older projects that wrapped up development, subdivisions. Sometimes small balances, sometimes a little larger.
Yeah, makes sense.
Again, periodically we'll just go through, clean it up. This is one of the house cleaning items that Cassandra had.
Okay, well, I'd make a motion then to return these fees held in escrow back to the original applicants.
Second.
Moved and seconded, and we can take this as a group, right? Like vote. I know it has a vote for each one, but we're gonna
Yes.
take it as a group.
Be kind, be kind.
Okay, moved and seconded, all in favor, Matt Watkins, aye, David Morris,
Aye.
Lee Darst,
Aye.
Woody Chidick,
Aye.
Leah Fernandez.
Aye.
All right. We have. Next is our meeting schedule, 2026 ZBA meeting schedule to review and vote. I think there was some discussion on, just the format of the meeting and continuing in the hybrid meeting. I don't know if anybody has any opinion on it. I think it's worked out well that if folks can't be here, they can do it remotely, and if they can be here, they can join in person. I guess the only thing to flag would be if we all knew a particular month, I wouldn't want to see anybody in here by themselves. But otherwise, does anyone have any comment on that, or does anybody have any known conflicts in the first, month or two on this schedule?
I don't.
Do we need to amend the December 8th date to what we just agreed upon, December 12th for the submittal? For the Joy Place?
Oh,
So those aren't the deadlines for additional materials. Those are the deadlines for,
New,
new projects.
not new, okay.
I will be attending by Zoom in February and March.
Okay. Yeah, I know I fly back on January 5th, but I should be here, so that's kind of right after the holiday break, but plan to be around, so. So
I mean, it depends if we want to have the, January, February meetings in person, or because of maybe weather conditions to have them by Zoom.
I'd rather see them hybrid,
Okay.
but
yeah, and I think we have the option. I mean, it worked out fine to kind of have the mix.
Mhm.
I think the only problem would be if everybody decided they weren't coming.
Well, the chair would have to,
Yeah,
well, the chair for the meeting would have to be here.
yeah. And how does it actually procedurally, how does it work as far as the, say there were two people in person and everybody else was on Zoom, one of the two people would be the chair, right? The in-person person.
Right.
All right, so do we have a motion to approve 2026 ZBA meeting schedule?
I make a motion to approve the 2026 meeting schedule.
Second.
Moved and seconded, Matt Watkins, aye, David Morris,
Aye.
Lee Darst,
Aye.
Woody Chidick,
Aye.
Leah Fernandez.
Aye.
We have AC blowing on us here, huh? It's like-
Yeah.
All right, and then we just have, the only other thing on here, other than a motion to adjourn, is that the next meeting is on January 5th. Do we know yet if there are like a number of applicants that we'll have for that meeting?
I'm expecting an application for on Gammons Road. But I have not received it yet. They are coming in to have a pre-application meeting to kind of go over some things. And that will be a special permit.
Yes, they're rebuilding a existing stone wall inside the wetlands.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
At least it's not at least it's not a dock with colonial stuff.
No. It's.
And will they go to Concom before us?
They already have, and they've been approved.
Okay.
Yeah, they just,
Yeah, that should be quick.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, happy holidays, everybody, and do we have a motion to adjourn?
Oh, I'd make a motion to adjourn.
Oh, second,
Second.
second. Not walking time.
Dave McMorris, aye.
Lee Darcey.
Right.
Leah Fernandez, I.
Great, thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thanks.